Hey, good morning, Richard. I see that you joined us. Can you hear me very well? I don't know if you can jump into the chat and let me know. Okay, great. And you can see my screen. Excellent. Well, thank you. We'll get started here in just a minute. Sometimes people are running from one meeting to another, so we'll usually wait a few minutes after the hour. What organization are you with, Richard? Oh, well, welcome to retirement. Glad to have you. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I've been myself on the healthcare CIO role for 20 some years and um, decided to jump over and do some consulting myself and help organizations out. So good to hear that there's folks like you out there that are doing the same. Okay, out in Virginia. Where is the uh, where's the university out there? What town? Richmond. Okay. Had a friend I knew many years ago from Richmond and loved it. He said it's a beautiful place. I haven't quite made it out to Richmond before, but I have gone through Virginia. Got beautiful rolling hills. Oh wow, you've been working in healthcare forever. You've seen a lot of changes. It's, yeah, yeah, 41 years. You go back. That's let's see, that's going to take us back into the late 70s. You've seen an amazing amount of change. Oh, good. That's great. I last organization I left was a medium-sized health system out of Missouri, and I not only had IT, but I had a division, and one of the areas I had was HIM, and they sure need an overhaul as their world's changing and has been changing. Oh, great. Yeah, maybe we should talk offline. Love to hear a little bit more about your background and uh, kind of what you're doing around data governance. Yeah, I run into a lot of, I don't know, I'm on a panel, or not a panel, on the board for Leading Age out of St. Louis, Missouri. We're actually going through the agenda right now for this year's summit. So maybe there's some connection. We can get more people, uh, to come out and talk about data governance and how to manage that as an asset. I'll definitely look him up. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'll see here about. Love to look at his model and methodology, and always looking for stuff that works well. I'll copy and paste that over into my Word document so I don't lose that. Hey, Richard, while you're there, do you want to reach out to, if you can pull up LinkedIn and just reach out and send a connection over and we can connect that way? We're giving out another minute or so for everybody to join us. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started here? quick check here. Okay, so we're going to talk about today is instituting effective governance that doesn't suck. And what this is about is starting at a very high level, and then we'll kind of narrow down into some of the critical pieces and parts within governance. Hopefully, by the end here, we'll have some outcomes. I'll share those with you in just a minute. So this is a little bit about myself. The founder of DewingIT Healthcare Consulting. I've worked in health systems from 500 to 85,000 employees as various roles and positions within those organizations. Been currently working at Leading Age, which is a post-acute care and acute care program board for a region in St. Louis. It does a summit program to help CEOs, COOs, and CNOs on various topics. Also is part of the Clinically Integrated Network Technology Board for Impact, which is a very large clinically integrated network out there. Also on health exchange boards in Oregon, Idaho, and Colorado. Just recently starting to fire up doing some blogging to give some how-tos and how to do things from a CIO's perspective, and also working on a current book called Governance. So with that, the outcomes from today is hopefully you'll walk away with understanding what governance is and how critical it is within a system, changing how we see governance in healthcare, looking at it from a different perspective, maybe a different lens than what we traditionally think. Learn about a leading governance framework, what to govern, and some insights into the tools used to help you get started. And then some simple do's and don'ts. I will tell you that what I'm going over with you is not just education, but it's stuff that I've actually implemented well in multiple health systems, and it's been very effective. In fact, I get countless. I don't know how we operated before, so without it. So that's, I think, a proven methodology that I think most folks will find helpful and useful. So let me talk about the major problem. In a healthcare organization, many folks are working at and can see broadly across the system as a whole. And they see how one area impacts another area and how the flow of care occurs and happens. The other side of it is we've got people that are delivering care, and their view is right there at the patient in the day-to-day workings, and they don't always see the system. So both of these are not right or not wrong. It's just different views of what people can see and how they function and operate together within the organization. So this is causing some challenges and some problems because decisions that people want to make a lot of times function and work best at the point of delivery, but it may not work, or it may impact other parts of the organization from the system view and perspective. So being able to bring these together in a way that allows for the point of delivery to be optimal, but also looking at the system as a whole and how it impacts and affects the organization. So we end up in a circumstance with this, is what I call just we're misaligned in what we're doing because we see things from different perspectives. So
What is governance? So governance is a formal capability that organizations design and use at various levels to do four things. One is to drive appropriate decisions, set priorities, manage investments, and ensure the strategic and operational outcomes are achieved. Now, what you're seeing here is three levels of a governance model. At the very top, you have an operational or an executive steering committee. Now, their role in all of this is to stay strategic and also to help remove barriers and manage escalations that occur. It's not a true operational driven group, and that's okay, and it needs to stay there and make the right types of decisions that are appropriate. The middle layer here is what we call the cross-functional steering committee. It plays between strategy and operations. So their job, and what makes each one of these up, is the chairs of each of these operating committees. So their job is to ensure that the integration across the system and the impacts that one area may be doing to another is facilitated, organized, and communicated. So they learn to work together more as a system in this level. The lower level is where the real work, I say, always happens. And these are operating committees. And every organization's a little different in how they want to have them. Some of them have existing committees that are already in place, and you just add this governance piece to their agenda. So it's not like you have to always create a whole new structure for things. But at this level, these committees are made up of, and I'll share with this in the next slide, of these process owners. And but they're the ones that actually make the operational decisions that affect the processes and how they do things across the board. So each of these operating committees, once again, is made up of these process owners. Many times in the organizations, I find that the departments or the domains, I call them, which could be lab, imaging services, they want to put their most technical person on these groups. And that's not what we want. And the reason being is when you look at the charters that are built out, and I'll share an example of one today, these operating committee members are actually empowered with the authority to make changes and drive decisions as it relates to how they perform their services. If you have a technical person from within the business or the domain or service line, essentially what you're doing is you're giving them authority to make those types of decisions, which bypasses the process owners, and it creates actually more chaos within a system. So it's quickly realized that these process owners are ones that really need to be at the table. Now, some of the departments and organizations don't know who these people are, or there's multiple depending upon the location. So the process of standing up governance is this phase of figuring out who the composition is going to be and making sure that there's one name in the box. And so there's a level of effort and work that has to go on to helping these organizations work through the defining of who's going to be on this committee. The other thing is there's only one IT person, and usually it's the IT leader that supports that domain. And many times that IT leader's on multiple committees here to help advise because they support multiple systems in those areas. And finally, the operational leader is the one that actually takes charge and leads the meetings and the committee, and is usually responsible for the communication of those decisions out, not IT. So in a separate webinar that I do around hoarders of technology, we talk about the value and the importance of operations making those types of decisions as it relates to their application portfolio and the changes that have to occur within those operational areas. In addition to that, there are some 7 beliefs that we talk about. One of those is that IT, about 95% of the systems that IT supports, IT doesn't need to run IT. The organization does. And so this is why IT is just a tool to those organizations, and they have to make decisions around those. So let's talk about what governance actually does. When you institute governance with these types of roles in this model, what it does is it begins to break down the operational silos that occur. Decisions that are being made now have to be brought to the table, and it starts to bring operations together. So sometimes when acquisitions have occurred, you have a lab that still has been used to being autonomous, now being a part of a system. The decisions that are made for those lab institutions are now having to come from one centralized location. And so it can put pressure on the health system to function as one. The other thing that the governance does is it helps organize decisions. And what that means is bringing the transparency of the information and requests that are coming in to make changes to the system. I'll give you an example of this. We had at one time a clinic that wanted to do a smoking cessation assessment as part of their intake process. Well, in an integrated environment that the health system was in, without governance, the impact is that IT would go ahead and put that change in. Well, all of a sudden, nobody was trained, nobody was communicated to, and a staff level person that wanted to have this assessment got it, but so did everybody else. And it caused chaos and confusion through the intake process throughout ambulatory visits. So it's really a good way for IT to become a backstop to those things and present those things to governance in a way that they can make the right decisions, and also the timing of those decisions. Also, governance brings the domains or service line owners to the table with the right authority. It's also a conduit for driving standards. So if you have, I'll give you another example, an organization that may have come together or has ran off on their own to build out a second or third or fourth reference lab. Well, IT has to put those connections in and build those interfaces for those reference labs. Governance helps drive the standards for that. They get to business-wise determine, are they going to have in their portfolio one or multiple connections to these entities. So it helps them bring that standardization. In addition, it helps drive how they're operationally going to perform and work to deliver the services that they do. It's also a great way to align operational priorities. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat through these governance sessions and one region or one area may have a priority of wanting to do something different than their counterparts. And this forces them to come together and agree on and have the dialogue and discussion of what's most important. And then also, it helps drive the conversation and the documentation around what the operational outcomes actually are. And then finally, it begins to give operations greater control over IT and its outcomes. In addition to that, it also gives IT a way in which it can begin to present stuff meaning the things that you'll govern, and we'll talk about that in a minute, bring it more transparently to operations to make decisions about their business. So long and short, it brings this alignment and bring some synergy that hasn't been there before. So what I'd like to talk about next here is the understand where governance fits within the organization as a whole. First thing I've got to share briefly with you is what a work system is. So all the efforts that are directed towards taking care of a patient or providing some sort of value to the patient and their family, that's what the work system is. It's the one system that rules them all, whether it's documented, unspoken, however it is, it's how the work system functions. The second component is what we call the support system. And there's three dimensions to it, but it needs to be connected to the work system in order for it to function appropriately or drive the changes it needs to within that work system. So the three areas, and I won't go into detail too much, I'll just let you see these, is the alignment of the support system, of which governance, IT, facility services, supply chain, all sorts of areas are support systems to that work system. It creates engagement, and it focuses on improvements to the work system. If that connection does not exist, there is a lot of chaos and confusion within the organization and a lot of misalignment that's going on. So governance fits right into this support system model, and this model helps drive the connections to the work system. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, and but I will reference this throughout the rest of this webinar. So, change how we see things. So, what I like to do is talk about and help us better understand the role technology plays in this system, because this is as fundamental as it gets, but it's also very misunderstood and a proponent of problems within an organization. The first layer is what I call capabilities. These are abilities that organizations have in order to deliver the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So for example, financial management, care management, population health management, vendor management. These are all just different capabilities, and there's a million more that healthcare institutions have. Those capabilities have one or more supported processes. For example, a bed assignment, the process for transporting a patient, okay, doing a patient assessment, ordering supplies, all these processes that occur. My experience has been, and maybe others is a little different, is that most organizations don't really have an inventory of what those processes are, which then leads to the second problem, which then is, well, then who owns those processes? Now, this is where technology comes into play, is the applications. What they do is two things. They support and automate those processes. In addition, they capture and collect data. The last piece is the infrastructure. Now, we know what that is. It's usually your hardware and the connectivity and whatnot. So let me tell you the problem that I have seen time and time again is that organizations pretty much understand their capabilities that they have. The problem comes is that depending on the health system, most of them will jump and they'll look to the technology itself to drive improvements to processes or areas that are not functioning well or where they need to get improved performance. The problem with this is that one, technology and the way that it's designed ends up driving out and causing dissatisfaction into those processes. The second thing it does is the problem with this is that healthcare is a very people touchy-feely organization and culture. And most people don't want to have the process discussions because it causes conflict or lead through the standardization of processes across an organization. So they focus on, well, if I put technology in, it will put pressure on those things. Whether they're cognizant of that or not, that's what happens. It's why folks that have put in Epic or Cerner into these health systems are now reeling from how do we operationally function now? Because it's now put the pressure on a single way of doing things that they haven't really addressed or worked through to begin with. So this is a major piece to understand. So when we talk about operations in the top portions of this, governing the technology, it really brings out, are we governing technology or are we governing our operations? The way I look at it with governance is it's operational governance, and I'm giving them technology to govern and to manage because it affects their processes and outcomes. So here are the 7 beliefs I mentioned earlier. This is a key part to looking at things and changing the conversation and the culture. So number 1 is 98% of the technology IT supports isn't needed to run IT, which means that IT doesn't need Epic, doesn't need Cerner, doesn't need the financial system, Lawson, whatever it is, to function. The departments need that to help automate and drive efficiencies in their processes. Operations needs to begin to believe that technology helps them automate that and capture their data. IT, number 2, is to believe that they consult and advise. Reason that this is important is I sat in a revenue cycle meeting and other ones as well, but when it comes to mind, and we were talking about work queues within revenue cycle, and which meant who owns the processes to managing those work queues. And I said, who does? And IT's hand is raised. So we're already confused that IT does not run operations, it enables them. And so IT's got to start to begin that they consult and advise because they can see across the board as a whole. Operations believes that we lead and sponsor how services are delivered to the patient. The third is that we provide transparency to operations for decisions. Operations believes that we make and communicate decisions. IT, 30% of IT resource time goes to incident, maintenance, and documentation. That's untouchable time that IT gets. Operations believes that 70% of IT's time is a checkbook spent by operations on how they want. So in other words, IT doesn't care so much about what they work on. They want to make sure they're just working on the right stuff. And when operations is given a checkbook of time for those resources, then all of a sudden they get to spend that how they want, and they start getting more focused and more lasered in on the right kind of work. IT, we assign and fulfills the right work. Operations, we prioritize the work we need IT to do for us. Number 6 is we bring about the technology improvements operations needs. And then operations, we continuously improve our processes, train staff, and deliver excellent service. And finally, we are stewards of technology and enablers of operations. And we drive outcomes and standards, not technology. I was in a summit, I think it was 2 years ago, and I had asked the group of CEOs, there was about 300 of them, is technology driving your operations or is operations driving your technology? and it was a resounding technology's driving my operations. We need to get this reversed and get operations driving the technology outcomes. So healthcare systems are going through this transformation, or in different pockets are doing it. But it's where these siloed or singular models. So you have registration folks that are in different departments, but they're performing and acting differently. And the outcomes that you get are differing and confusing, and it's causing some chaos within IT to having to change the system so much to try to meet everybody's demands, which there's nobody really leading and driving that registration domain. So in a work system model where you have registration that is responsible for delivery of registration services to multiple departments the same way. Now all of a sudden you get greater impact, consistent consumer experience, you start to drive change, much more standard across the board. Accountability and ownership burden. So about 10 years ago, technology projects that were out there, when I say technology projects, it could be EMR implementations, whatnot, the burden was placed upon the CIO to ensure that that was executed and done right. And operations would take accountability for it about 36% of the time. The problem with this is that IT does not have responsibility for the operational outcomes for those service departments, but yet they're responsible for implementing a technology that drives the changes and impacts their processes. In this type of a model, where that burden is put upon IT for the accountable for the outcomes, you end up with a lot of failed projects. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of money wasted, a lot of effort, and a lot of frustration. What governance does is it helps drive that ownership burden the other direction and puts accountability on operations. I'll give you an example is that we sat in an HR meeting, and they were really broken into two regions, but never really functioned and coordinated things right. As we brought forth the projects that were all in the queues for work and needed to, it's really your portfolio. Operations then had some stuff they wanted to continue to add into that bucket. One of which was a project that allowed for changes to benefits. Well, when we brought up the questions around, there's some criteria that we use to help vet if the business side is ready for these projects. One of the things is all your policies and procedures in place. And number two, is everybody in the organization aware and supportive and ready for this initiative? When we got to that question, the answer was no. One of the regions was not aware of it. So we said, okay, and it ranked as one of the highest priorities for them. We said, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to go forward with it? Or do you want to work with them and figure out, a new timeline? Well, let us get with them first. So lo and behold, it was about a year and a half that they pushed the project out. So it went from one of the top 3 projects to now a year and a half delay and wait. And I thought about that, and I thought how much time would have been wasted running around trying to get a different region on board with this project that IT is not leading. And so it really made a difference there in that burden shift of responsibility and readiness. So I've seen way too often that organizations, when they put in governance, they usually take a tools-driven approach and what we call the flavor of the month. And rightfully, when a tool is implemented, you get some sort of value and outcome, but then it fades off and it continues through this cycle of trying to get improvement. Employees get frustrated with that because it becomes, okay, just wait this one out and it'll go away. So what we need to do is start taking more of a sustainable system-driven approach, institute a culture and a methodology around how to do governance, but not do it all at one time. Add incremental pieces to the governance and see continuous sustainable change that builds upon each other. And I'll show you here, it might be the next slide, around what we govern. And I don't like to see people just go full board into it because you fail very fast. So making incremental changes, then it becomes a way of life in the way that people do things. And it becomes very effective. But you've got to be nimble enough to make adjustments. But this is the type of sustainment approach that we want to take. So the case for change in many organizations of why they need to do something differently, or why or at some point the pain gets so great that they've got to change the way they do things. Number one is there's a lack of allocated ownership, as I've mentioned, across the organization. Sometimes there's just a single body governing IT. This creates an enormous problem because the changes that need to occur either don't get addressed because that governance committee, that single body, is focused on more strategic things in the larger projects, and it stifles operations. Lack of process owners. IT is assumed accountable by default. We talked about that. Governance becomes an IT progress update meeting. So I can't tell you the number of times that a governance for IT goes so flat because IT finally or slowly morphs into this, I come to the steering committee to provide an update on all the great work we're doing. You will kill your governance groups if you do that. So I'll talk about that in the do's and don'ts. And there's a lack of readiness and technology transparency among the service lines. It creates unnecessary demand and churn. So as we build an effective governance capability, we've got to articulate the vision of where we're going. And what helps guide me in developing out visions of where we're going is I always have to ask myself, what's the difference between a vision and a dream? A vision, you can see yourself on top of the mountain. A dream is the mountain comes to me. So that can help in any sort of change management initiative around the people and processes. Visions are one of the most important things to help people understand where we're going and why we're going there. That vision's got to be established by a set of strategies and goals that are centered around it. Without those are the guardrails to be able to achieve that vision. And finally, establishing the set of principles, which are what I call the behaviors, how we're going to behave and function. Those are the three major components to helping communicate and establish and get moving with a governance model. So let's talk about what will be governed. So there are 5 areas that governance would govern: process and data, technology, strategy and roadmap, new capabilities, and risk. So there are a lot of things under each one of these pieces, of which I highly, highly recommend that you do not do them all, but let it mature over time. What I do recommend is that these areas that are highlighted in red, is that those are the 3 or 4 areas that you want to begin to focus on. And I'll show you a few templates and different things that we use for that. But under the process and data, the standards and improvement, this is in operations. So Starting to declare your application standards is a huge piece, but also establishing standards in processes. So starting to gather what are the operational processes that are inventoried. Do we even know what those are? Because if we don't, we can't govern it. There's a whole set of work that goes around to just capture and gather that. The technology side is the application portfolio, and I'll show you a little bit there about that. And then also changes. That's a huge piece in order for operations to really start getting some traction, is to manage the change requests that are coming in. And then finally, the other key piece is the operational strategy. What I have found that most operational committees do not have a strategy for their departments. They just firefight, or they get an idea about something great they want to do, and it probably is, but let's document an actual strategy and then build out a roadmap of what that might look like. So that what that does is helps begin to see the demand and allows governance to be able to manage that as that new stuff comes in, and they can prioritize. Without that, we don't know what the outcomes really are that they're trying to achieve. So I talked a little bit about the framework of the governance model. I won't go through that because I've already talked about it. But what this is here is a standard operating committee charter. So again, on the left-hand side in the top, gives kind of an idea of what level that this charter is focused on. The description of what it is, what the accountabilities are, and then what the responsibilities are. For example, we review and recommend new business cases. They're responsible for communicating decisions that come from the committee. On the left-hand side, in the middle here, is where the composition gets put together and identified who the chairs are going to be. Most committees, depending upon which department and how widespread they are across the enterprise, typically anywhere from 4 to 8 people is effective. Sometimes it doesn't start out that way with like a provider governance, but if I was to give you a range of staffing there, that's about what that is. And then what's, I think, one of the most important pieces to this charter is the authority. Some organizations I've had to go to the board to get authority given to these operating committees to make some of these decisions, especially in the physician arena. So the stages of maturity, the first phase of this is standing up. Now recognize that every one of your operating committees and cross-functional committees are going to be in different places, and that's okay because they are in different places. Within the first couple of months, you'll see the things coming out more around the technical things. How do we gather service requests, getting portfolios, those kinds of things. But it's fun to watch these committees quickly transition over to the majority of the discussions and challenges are now focused on the business issues. Somebody requested something, and Sally that's on the committee had never even heard of that before, and they've got to go figure out and find out what's going on. And then after about 3 to 6 months, you start putting in some of those other areas in what we govern. Maybe you want to start focusing on risk, business risk, or technology risk. But you get to select and choose, and then you slowly implement more of a sustainable model this way. Once again, it's really fun to watch this burden start to shift in about 3 to 6 months. You'll start seeing that transformation actually happen. The demand that IT is overwhelmed with trying to manage really becomes the demand that operations now sees and has to deal with. So using principles to guide decisions, governance decisions. This is just an example of one, and is outlining the key constituents, the guiding principle itself, which is how we're going to make these decisions around think globally, act locally. What does it mean that we recognize differences and diversities across its locations and communities, and designs and delivers its services to support those differences? And then why is it important? I can't tell you how many times my kids would ask me questions about, Dad, can I go to my friend's house tonight? My answer is no. And then their response is why? And we need to make sure that we articulate the why out. And in this case, this is just an example, is we want to structure our services to be consistent and familiar, regardless of where they are accessed, to achieve quality at a low cost. So this then gives us the reasons. And in governance, it's fun to kind of watch, because people will start to correct themselves to say, hey, wait a minute, we're not functioning this way right. And a lot of that has to do with the reasons why. And they approve these guiding principles. Some three or four things to start to govern. I'll talk about those here. The first is the service request process. Service requests are things that are not broken. It's just we need a change. We need new functionality added in. We need an enhancement done. But in this governance process, how this works is that someone has an idea in the departments or in the staff. They go and discuss it with the service line owner, which is a governance committee member on the business side. And those service requests then are entered in. So at any point in the discussion with the service line owner, they may say, you know what, love the idea, but not sure that it's going to happen with all the stuff that's going on. So there can be a filter that occurs right there. If it's something worthy that they want to move forward operationally with, then they enter a service request in the system. Then IT brings those forward, and they're prioritized by governance. And then based on the priority, IT and operations work together in a project form to actually deliver it. And you get a happy team, you get a happy outcome. So why governance needs to manage changes, okay? So change is the process moving from one defined state to another. And the goal is to minimize the unknown impacts of operational changes to improve the work system as a whole. So these are some stages, and I won't go through them, in steps of ensuring that people and where they're at within those changes that are coming forward. So being able to capture and manage of not only the change, but when they want to put the change in place, because a lot of times there's prerequisites that have got to happen. People need to be trained, training and development needs to be brought in. Those materials updated, make sure everybody knows how to move forward. Third thing here is the application portfolio. I'm huge on application portfolios, but this is an example. This is a real example of an application portfolio. Going back to remembering where technology sits within the organization and the role it plays, let me show you. We have to kind of look at this count of 74 that are in IT, because a lot of those are Adobe Acrobats and desktop type productivity applications. So let's look over here. Pharmacy has 27 systems. Okay, this is a real health system. Imagine the duplication and the chaos in the processes that are occurring there. If I always say, if I go down to Walgreens, I bet I'm not going to find 27 systems across Walgreens. And this is within one health system. Over here, you can see 34 imaging systems. Well, imagine the amount of duplication that's going on when a patient breaks their ankle and has it done in one imaging system, goes to a specialist, and they're on a different imaging system. what confusion and chaos that causes, and the amount of cost that it's added to the patient and the insurance companies. So a portfolio can be very telling, but putting applications in a way that they understand these are all the technologies that are used to run your imaging services, your pharmacy, whatever it is. And then they can begin to get visibility on what these things are. What I like to do then is put them into these formats. And so going across here, I would take an application. Here's just an example, is that they're going to one of three buckets. The first bucket could be an enterprise standard, meaning it's here to stay, used at all locations. It's what we use. Which domain, what is the capability, and the application or module. What is the cost? And then over to the right, what is the roadmap? Meaning, when do the upgrades occur and happen? So we manage a healthy life cycle around that. So these are the care and feeding and the clarity of what we use across the organization as a whole. They are enterprise standards. They get to be declared by the operating committee and approved by them of what those are. The next bucket that a portfolio of applications fall into is these are non-standards, but they're to be replaced, meaning that they may not be fully deployed across the organization as a whole, but we have pockets that are still using a duplicate technology, but it is going to get replaced. And then once again, when do we want to do that? And then the third bucket are those applications that are out there that are not being used, but need to be rationalized. They're just there because we regulatory-wise have to maintain patient information or business information based on our retention policies. Those are opportunities for that. It's important to capture the cost so that you can begin to see how much the governance can see how much it costs to run that book of business at that dollar amount. And they get to, and once again, that flows over to the IT budget. But when organizations say my IT department's too expensive, what we're really need to be clear about is that looking at, in this case, the pharmacy had 27 systems. That's really not IT's fault. That's pharmacies, because they're the ones that need that. So we have to work together with them to drive the cost down. So I won't go through in detail on this, but to take an approach here is standing up governance like a project, being clear about the goals, activities, resources, and whatnot going forward. The do's and don'ts, okay? Do communicate a lot, especially the vision and direction that's being headed. Do allow operational leaders to take charge. Many times IT is reluctant to do that, but allow it to happen. It's a good thing and it works well. Do keep IT out of operational decision making. Do provide IT advisory and consulting services. Help them understand the implications of some of the decisions they're considering. Do bring lots of decisions that need to be made. The number one thing is don't avoid, stay away, run from using governance as a status update meeting. I'm telling you, it goes flat and you will have to restart. And once again, becomes kind of the flavor of the month thing, and it's very difficult to recover. So that concludes the presentation for today on the webinar. I do want to make note here that we're doing a webinar on what I call We're Hoarders of Technology, which deals with the application portfolio. Very interesting and very insightful. And then we have coming up, working on a date right now, is around a data management life cycle. If you need help, know of somebody that needs help, please feel free to reach out. I'm here to provide that help for folks. And then I always like to end here with a little inspirational thought to make it through the week, which is now Friday, but maybe it'll inspire you through the weekend. I'm a huge Office fan, and so I like to look at this as you can't put words back into my mouth. As funny as Michael Scott is, PowerPoint, 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 and then leave you with thinking about becoming the world's best boss out there. So hopefully you enjoyed today, and you've gained at least some nuggets of insights that may be helpful for you. And like I said, reach out if you've got some questions or want to talk. More than happy to do that. Thanks, everybody, and hope you have a great weekend.